There's something about walking into the wilderness that makes you feel instantly small, like you've stepped through an invisible membrane separating our manicured world from something much older and less concerned with your comfort. The trail markers, the GPS, the fancy moisture-wicking gear, they're all just comforting lies we tell ourselves. Little talismans against the vastness. You follow the path, you check your map, you convince yourself you're exploring, but deep down, you know you're just a visitor being tolerated. Because in the wilderness, the concept of a trail is really just a suggestion. A human scratch across something that was here long before us and will remain long after. People go missing in these places every year. Their backpacks found neatly placed against trees, their tents still perfectly pitched, their boots still laced. Tonight, we're walking some paths where the trees grow a little too close, where the echoes return a little too changed, where the trail markers lead in directions that aren't marked on any map. So lace up your boots, check your compass, and try not to lose sight of the person hiking ahead of you. These are 3 scary wilderness stories from hikers, because sometimes the most dangerous thing about going off the beaten path is finding out you're not the only one who did. This one takes place out in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina, a stretch I'd hiked dozens of times before without incident. It's funny how the trails you know best are the ones that can turn on you fastest. This happened back in October 2019, and I still haven't been able to make myself go back out there since. I call this story the Whistling Trail. I'd been planning a 4-day solo trek along a remote section that hooks around Grandfather Mountain. It's technically part of the AT, but it's one of those stretches that even experienced hikers sometimes skip because the elevation changes are brutal and the trail maintenance is spotty at best. I'd done it twice before though, once in summer and once in early spring, so I figured an autumn hike would complete my collection of seasons on that route. The weather forecast showed clear skies all week, unseasonably warm for mid-October with temperatures in the high 60s during the day. Perfect hiking weather. I packed light, my North Face Terra 55, 3 days of dehydrated meals, my Sawyer water filter, and my trusty Garmin GPS. Even splurged on new Merrell boots for the occasion. I left my Subaru at the Wilson Creek Visitor Center around 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. The parking lot was empty except for a Forest Service truck, and the ranger inside, an older guy named Donnie with a salt and pepper beard, gave me a friendly wave as I shouldered my pack. Heading up to Callaway Gap? He asked, looking over my gear. That's the plan, then loop around through Harper Creek back to here. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing slightly. Be careful up past Blue Ridge Pinnacle. Trail's been acting funny lately. I remember laughing at that. Trails don't act funny, Donnie. This one does, he said, not smiling. Had 3 hikers get turned around up there last month. One of them swore he kept hearing someone whistling, leading him off course. I chalked it up to typical ranger talk. They always have some spooky story to tell solo hikers, and headed out. The first day was uneventful. The hardwoods were in peak color, with maples blazing red against the deep green of the pines. I made good time, averaging about 2 miles per hour despite the elevation. By late afternoon, I'd reached my first planned campsite at Timber Hollow. I set up my tent, cooked my mountain house lasagna, and sat watching the sunset paint the valley below in gold and purple. That's when I heard it for the first time, a whistled melody, 3 notes rising, and then 4 descending. It was faint, maybe a quarter mile away, coming from somewhere up the ridge. My first thought was another hiker, though I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day. I whistled back the same pattern. No response. After a minute, the tune repeated, same distance, same direction. I figured it was just an odd-sounding bird and crawled into my sleeping bag. I woke at first light and broke camp quickly. The morning was cool and misty, the kind of day where the forest feels ancient. I checked my GPS and headed out, planning to reach Harper Creek Falls by nightfall. That would put me about 7 miles from my car, an easy final day. Around 10 a.m., I heard the whistling again. Same pattern, same distance behind me. I stopped and listened. It stopped, too. I waited a full minute, and just as I started walking again, there it was. 3 up, 4 down, about a quarter-mile back. I picked up my pace, feeling the first tickle of unease between my shoulder blades. An hour later, I reached a fork in the trail that wasn't on my map. One path followed the ridge I'd been hiking. The other descended sharply into a ravine. I checked my GPS, which showed I should continue straight along the ridge. The whistling came again, now from the descending path. I hesitated, then continued along the ridge. After about 20 minutes, I noticed something odd. The trail blazes, which had been white, were now blue. I checked my map again. I was definitely still on the AT, which should have white blazes. I pulled out my GPS, but the screen was blank despite having charged it fully the night before. The whistling came again, now from behind me. 3 notes up, 4 down. But this time it sounded irritated somehow. The pitch was higher, the tempo faster. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I turned around, thinking I'd missed a turn. After backtracking about a mile, I came to a different fork than the one I remembered. This one with 3 options instead of 2. None of the blazes matched my map. The whistling came again, now from the leftmost path, sounding almost encouraging. Something felt very wrong. The forest had gone quiet. No birds, no squirrels, not even the sound of wind in the trees, just that whistling, now coming at regular intervals. I took the middle path, deliberately ignoring the direction of the whistling. Almost immediately, the trail became overgrown, as if rarely used. After pushing through rhododendron thickets for 20 minutes, I emerged at a small clearing and found myself looking at my own campsite from the night before. My fire ring was still there, ashes cold. That's impossible, I thought. I'd been hiking away from it all morning. The whistling came again, louder now, from the forest edge. 3 up, 4 down, but with a mocking quality I couldn't explain. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my paper map. According to it, I should be nowhere near yesterday's campsite. I took out my phone to check the compass app, but it showed the needle spinning continuously, never settling on a direction. I decided to follow the sun. It was early afternoon, so west was directly ahead of me. I knew the visitor center was roughly southwest of my starting point, so I figured if I kept the sun on my right, I'd eventually hit a road or landmark I recognized. I hiked for 3 hours without stopping. The forest grew denser, the trees larger and more gnarled than any I'd seen in this part of the Appalachians. The whistling continued, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, but always maintaining that same distance, close enough to hear clearly, too far to see its source. By late afternoon, I realized I was being herded. Every time I tried to veer southwest toward where the visitor center should be, the trail would mysteriously end in impenetrable brush or a sheer drop, forcing me back. And always, the whistling would come from the path of least resistance, almost cheerfully guiding me deeper into the wilderness. As dusk approached, I came to another clearing and stopped cold. In the center was my fire ring again, exactly as I'd left it that morning, in exactly the same clearing. But that was impossible. I'd been hiking all day, never doubling back, always pushing forward. The whistling came again, from all directions at once, 3 notes up, 4 notes down, now with a triumphant edge. I dropped my pack and ran blindly into the forest, abandoning the trail completely. Branches whipped my face as I crashed through underbrush, my only thought to get away from that maddening tune. I ran until my lungs burned, then collapsed against a massive oak. As my breathing slowed, I realized the forest had gone completely silent. No whistling. Relief washed over me, until I looked up and saw my pack hanging from a branch directly above me, the same pack I'd abandoned half a mile back. Night fell quickly after that. I had no choice but to make camp again, in the same clearing, with the same fire ring for the 3rd time. I built a fire with trembling hands and sat with my back against a tree, jumping at every sound from the darkness. Around midnight, the whistling began again, distant at first, then gradually closer. 3 up, 4 down, 3 up, 4 down. It circled my camp, never showing itself, never varying its distance. I clutched my hiking knife, though I knew instinctively it would be useless against whatever was out there. I must have dozed off despite my terror, because I woke to bright sunlight and profound silence. My fire had burned to ashes, and scratched into the dirt beside it was a crude map, showing my position, the visitor center, and a path between them marked with X's. The whistling came once more, distant now, from the direction the map indicated. 3 up, 4 down, almost gently, like a mother calling a child. I had a choice to make: follow the marked path and risk walking into a trap, or try again to find my own way out. But after 2 days of walking in circles, I knew the forest wasn't going to let me choose my own route. I gathered my gear and followed the map. The trail was clearly marked now with fresh white blazes that almost seemed to glow against the tree bark. The whistling continued ahead of me, always maintaining that same distance, leading me on. By mid-afternoon, I began recognizing landmarks: a distinctive boulder, a lightning-struck tree, a small stream crossing. I was approaching the visitor center from the northwest, a direction I'd never hiked before. The whistling grew fainter with each step until it faded completely as the trees thinned and I saw the gravel parking lot ahead. My Subaru sat alone in the lot, exactly where I'd left it. The Forest Service truck was gone. According to my watch, I'd been in the woods exactly 24 hours, not the 3 days it had felt like. I threw my pack in the car and drove straight home, checking the rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see something following me. That night, I spread my maps across the kitchen table and traced the route I thought I'd taken. According to the topography, the places I'd been couldn't exist. Cliffs where there should be gentle slopes, valleys where there should be ridges. A week later, I drove back to the visitor center, determined to speak with Donnie, the ranger. A younger woman was at the desk instead. When I asked about him, her expression turned solemn. "Donnie? We don't have anyone by that name working here," she said. I described him: salt and pepper beard, green uniform, friendly manner. She shook her head slowly. "Sir, the only ranger named Donnie who ever worked here was Donnie Peterson. He disappeared on a routine patrol up near Blue Ridge Pinnacle in 1973. They never found his body, and I never went back to that section of trail. Sometimes at night, I still hear it in my dreams. 3 notes up, 4 notes down. And I wake up wondering if I ever really made it out of those woods at all, or if I'm still walking in circles, following a path that something else has chosen for me." This one's a story from a longtime listener named Mitchell. He sent it in last month, and I've been holding on to it for the right time. It's about a hiking trip gone wrong in one of America's most famous national parks. Mitchell says it's been almost 3 years since it happened, but he still gets anxious whenever anyone asks him to repeat something. Here's his story that we're calling The Echo Chamber. "I used to be big into hiking. Used to. Past tense. My REI membership card is gathering dust in my wallet, and my once pristine Osprey backpack sits untouched in my garage. 3 summers ago, I went on what was supposed to be a 6-day trek through the northern section of Yellowstone with my 4 closest friends from college: Danny, Trevor, Marcus, and Elise. We'd been planning it for months, securing permits, mapping routes, and testing gear on weekend hikes. I'd visited Yellowstone twice before, but never for an extended backcountry trip. The others were experienced hikers too, except for Elise, who'd only started the year before, but had quickly gotten hooked. We arrived on July 8th, 2020, during what the Rangers were calling an unprecedented heat wave. The main office at Mammoth Hot Springs was crowded with tourists, fanning themselves with park maps, and the digital thermometer outside read 97 degrees Fahrenheit. A ranger with Kelsey on her name tag handed us our backcountry permits with a warning. "Make sure you're carrying at least a gallon of water per person per day," she said, circling water sources on our map. "Some of the smaller streams might be dried up, and check in at any ranger station you pass. We're monitoring the situation closely." We thanked her and headed out. Our route would take us on a 42-mile loop through some of the less visited areas of the park, starting near Tower Fall and working northward. The first 2 days were exactly what we'd hoped for: challenging terrain, breathtaking views, and the kind of conversations that only seem to happen when you're miles from civilization. Sure, it was hot, but our camelbacks were full, and we'd packed electrolyte tablets. The trouble started on day 3, when we decided to take what looked like a shortcut on our National Geographic trail map. It wasn't on the official park map, but Trevor insisted he'd read about it on a hiking forum. "It'll save us at least 4 miles, he said, tracing the faint line with his finger, "and there's supposed to be an amazing view." The turnoff was marked by a small cairn of stacked rocks. The trail immediately narrowed and began to descend steeply between two ridgelines. After about 30 minutes, we found ourselves in what I can only describe as a slot canyon, maybe 20 feet across at its widest, with walls that towered at least 100 feet above us. The temperature dropped immediately, which was a welcome relief. The canyon floor was strewn with smooth rocks and occasional patches of sand, and our voices seemed to bounce strangely off the walls. That's when Marcus, always the goofball, cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hello!" he shouted. We waited for the echo, that familiar hello, ello, lo, lo that you'd expect. Instead, what came back was different. Marcus, just his name, clear as day in what sounded like his own voice. We all froze. Trevor laughed nervously. "That was weird. Do it again." Marcus, looking unsettled, called out again. "Is anybody there?" The echo returned. "Nobody you want to meet." That's when Danny grabbed his arm. "Stop it. That's not funny." "I'm not doing anything," Marcus protested. "It's just a weird echo." "That's not how echoes work," Elise said quietly. She was a physics major and usually the most rational of our group. "Sound waves can't change words." I decided to try it myself. "Echo test," I called out. After a brief pause, "Don't test me, Mitchell." My full name, not Mitch, which is what everyone calls me. Mitchell. A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. "Let's keep moving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This place is playing tricks on us." We continued deeper into the canyon, our pace quickening. The walls seemed to narrow the further we went, and the sliver of blue sky above looked increasingly distant. Our footsteps crunched loudly on the gravelly path. Trevor checked his phone. No signal, obviously, but the GPS still works. We should come out near Specimen Ridge if we keep heading east. The heat was starting to build again, trapped in the canyon like an oven. We each took careful sips from our water bottles, aware that we needed to ration. According to the map, there should have been a creek running through this canyon, but the bed was bone dry. About an hour in, Elise stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" We all went silent, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of our breathing and the occasional skittering of a small rock. Then I heard it, a faint whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "What is it saying?" Danny whispered. "I can't make it out," I replied. Marcus, apparently trying to lighten the mood, shouted again, "If you're some kind of canyon spirit, give us a sign." The echo that returned was low, almost a growl. "I know what you did in Boulder." The color drained from Marcus's face. 2 years earlier, he'd been involved in a hit-and-run accident in Boulder, Colorado. He'd been drinking and sideswiped a parked car, then panicked and drove away. He'd only told the 4 of us about it. "What the fuck?" he whispered. Elise, looking shaken, took a step forward. "It's just coincidence, or maybe acoustics making us hear things that aren't there." She called out, her voice wavering. "Hello? Anyone there?" The canyon waited a beat before responding. "Does Jason know you're here?" Elise stumbled backward. Jason was her boyfriend. They'd been fighting before the trip, and she'd told him she was going to visit her parents, not on a hiking trip with us. "This isn't happening," she said, her voice rising. "This isn't possible." But it was happening. One by one, the canyon called back to us with things only we should have known. To Danny, it mentioned the pain medication she'd been stealing from her grandmother. To Trevor, it whispered about the married woman he'd been seeing. When my turn came, I braced myself, but nothing could have prepared me for hearing my own voice bounce back. "Your sister's accident wasn't really an accident." My heart nearly stopped. 10 years ago, my sister had fallen from a balcony during a party. She'd survived, but with permanent brain damage. I'd been there, had seen her arguing with her boyfriend, had watched him push her. Not hard, but enough. I'd never told anyone that I'd witnessed it, had let everyone believe it was just a tragic accident. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "Now." The canyon seemed to be growing darker despite the early afternoon hour. The walls, which had seemed merely imposing before, now felt malevolent, as if they were watching us, listening to us. We practically ran for the next mile, no one speaking, our breathing harsh in the hot, still air. Our water supplies were dwindling faster than planned in the heat. The straps of my backpack chafed against my sweat-soaked shirt, and my mouth felt like sandpaper. The canyon began to widen slightly, which gave us hope, but then it curved sharply and narrowed again. We should have reached the end by now, according to Trevor's GPS, but the walls still loomed on either side of us. "This doesn't make sense," Trevor said, staring at his phone. "We should be out of the canyon already." That's when Danny pointed ahead. "Look." About 50 yards in front of us stood a figure. From that distance, it looked like a park ranger in the familiar gray and green uniform. We called out, waving frantically. The figure didn't move or respond. As we got closer, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't moving at all, completely still, like a mannequin, and its face was blank. Smooth skin where features should be. We stopped cold. The figure stood there, motionless, for what felt like minutes. Then, slowly, it raised one arm and pointed back the way we had come. "Go back," it said in a voice that was somehow all our voices at once. "This is not your path." Then it simply wasn't there anymore. No movement, no fading away, just there 1 second and gone the next. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. We turned around and began retracing our steps, moving as quickly as we could without running, afraid that running would somehow make things worse. The whispers started again, growing louder as we moved. They weren't echoes anymore. They were coming from all around us, overlapping, some in our voices, some in voices I didn't recognize. They spoke of things we'd done, things we'd thought, things we'd hidden. Secrets spilling out like water, filling the canyon. The heat became unbearable. My vision started to blur at the edges and I stumbled. Marcus caught my arm, his face pale and streaked with dirt and sweat. "Keep moving," he said. "Don't listen to them." Easier said than done. The voices seemed to be inside my head now, and I couldn't tell if the others were hearing the same things I was. Were they hearing about how I sometimes wished my sister had died instead of living as she was? About how I resented being her part-time caretaker? About how I'd lied to these very friends about why I couldn't make certain events? Danny was the first to break. She suddenly stopped and pressed her hands against her ears. "Shut up!" she screamed. "Just shut up!" Her voice echoed back, "Make me." That's when she turned and shoved Trevor hard. "You told them," she accused. "You're the only one who knew about the pills." Trevor stumbled backward. "What? No. The canyon is doing this, not me." "It can't know these things," she shouted. "Someone is telling it." In minutes, we were all shouting, accusing each other of things that made no sense. The secrets the canyon had revealed hung in the air between us like physical things, ugly and distorted. Friends who had known each other for years suddenly looked like strangers. I don't remember who threw the first punch, Trevor or Marcus, but suddenly they were grappling on the ground, sending up clouds of dust. Elise was crying, backing away from all of us. Danny just stood there, watching with a strange expression that I didn't recognize. That's when I heard it, the sound of running water, faint at first, then louder. We all froze, listening. It was coming from ahead of us, back the way we'd originally come. "Water," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "We need water." We forgot our fight and moved toward the sound. Around a bend we hadn't noticed before, we found it, a small spring bubbling up from between the rocks, forming a clear pool before continuing as a tiny stream down the canyon floor. We fell to our knees beside it, filling our bottles, splashing our faces. The water was cool and sweet, impossibly refreshing. As we drank, the whispers seemed to fade, and the oppressive feeling that had been building lifted slightly. With clearer heads, we followed the stream, which grew wider as we went. Within an hour, we found ourselves emerging from the canyon into a broad valley that looked nothing like where we'd entered. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. In the distance, we could see the lights of a ranger station. None of us spoke much on the walk there, or during the explanation to the puzzled rangers about how we'd gotten so far off our permitted route. They told us no slot canyon existed where we claimed to have been, just a series of rolling hills. Our National Geographic map showed nothing unusual either, despite what Trevor had seen earlier. The shortcut was gone. We cut our trip short after that. The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We've barely spoken since, these friends who once shared everything. Some secrets should stay buried, I guess, but some truths need to be faced. I called my sister's ex-boyfriend last month, told him I knew what happened that night. He didn't deny it. Sometimes I wonder if that's what the canyon wanted, for us to confront the things we'd hidden even from ourselves. I still hike occasionally, but never in groups and never in narrow spaces, and I never ever call out to hear my echo. This one's a bit different from my usual stories. It happened about 18 months ago, and I've been trying to make sense of it ever since. I'm what you might call an avid mountaineer, not professional by any stretch, but I've been climbing since university and have tackled most of the major peaks in the UK over the past 15 years. The Scottish Highlands have always been my favorite playground, particularly the more remote areas where you can hike for days without seeing another soul. This story is called the Hollow Cairn. Last March, I decided to take a week off work to tackle a particularly isolated route in the northwestern highlands near Ullapool. The weather forecast wasn't ideal, typical Scottish spring with fog and intermittent drizzle, but I'd climbed in worse. I packed my Gore-Tex, my North Face all-weather tent, and enough supplies to last 10 days just to be safe. I started at a little car park near Loch Broom on a Tuesday morning. The weather was actually decent that first day, clouds high enough to see the surrounding peaks, temperature around 8 degrees Celsius. I made good progress, covering about 15 miles before setting up camp near a small stream. It was on the second day that I first noticed the cairn. For those who don't know, cairns are those little stacks of rocks you see on mountain trails. They're used as navigational markers, especially in areas where the path isn't always clear. This particular cairn was about half a mile off the main trail, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking a steep valley. What caught my attention was its size and construction. Most cairns in the highlands are simple affairs, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. This one was easily 7 feet high and had an unusual hollow center, like a miniature stone hut. I've got this habit of documenting unusual landmarks on my hikes, so I pulled out my Canon PowerShot and snapped a few photos. The cairn made a good landmark, and I noted it in my Ordnance Survey map before continuing on my way. The weather took a turn that afternoon. Fog rolled in thick and heavy, reducing visibility to maybe 20 yards at best. I pushed on for another few hours before deciding to make camp early. According to my GPS, I was about 4 miles from where I'd seen the cairn. That night, the wind picked up. My tent was well secured, but the constant flapping of the fabric made sleep difficult. I dozed fitfully, waking several times to the sound of what seemed like stones falling nearby. I chalked it up to natural erosion. These mountains are ancient, but constantly changing. The fog hadn't lifted by morning. If anything, it had grown denser. I considered waiting it out, but decided to press on, following my planned route using my compass and GPS. About 2 hours into the day's hike, I stumbled across the cairn again. At first, I thought I must have gotten turned around in the fog and somehow looped back to where I'd been yesterday. But checking my GPS confirmed I was exactly where I should be, nearly 4 miles from yesterday's position. I approached the cairn, confused and a bit unsettled. It looked different, not dramatically so, but enough that I noticed. The hollow center seemed larger, and the entire structure appeared to have shifted slightly, stones rearranged in a configuration I didn't remember. I took out my camera and scrolled through yesterday's photos to compare. What I saw made my stomach drop. In yesterday's photos, the cairn was solid, no hollow center at all, just a traditional conical pile of stones. I stared at the photos, then at the cairn before me, trying to reconcile the two. I took new photos, thinking perhaps I'd misremembered or my camera had somehow distorted the original images. Then I checked my map to confirm my location. According to all my tools and instruments, I was nowhere near where I'd been yesterday. I decided to push on. The fog made everything disorienting, and I told myself I was just confused. Maybe there were 2 similar cairns in the area. That night in my tent, I reviewed the day's photos. The cairn with its hollow center was clearly visible, nothing like the solid pyramid in yesterday's shots. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd be out of this area tomorrow anyway, but I wasn't. On the 3rd day, despite walking a solid 6 hours in what my compass indicated was a consistent easterly direction, I came across the cairn again. Or at least, a cairn that was situated in exactly the same type of terrain, a rocky outcrop overlooking a steep valley. This time, the hollow center was unmistakably larger, almost like a doorway. The stones themselves seemed different too, darker with an almost bluish tint I hadn't noticed before. I approached cautiously, some instinct telling me to keep my distance. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. My GPS was functioning, but showed me in a location that made no geographical sense based on my travel distance and direction. My compass, which had been reliable for years, was spinning erratically. I took more photos, my hands shaking slightly. Something was very wrong here. The landscape around me was familiar, yet subtly altered. The shapes of the distant mountains didn't match my map, and the valleys seemed deeper, more pronounced than they should have been. I decided to make camp early and get my bearings. As I set up my tent about half a mile from the cairn, I realized the fog had changed too. It moved in ways fog shouldn't, swirling in specific patterns, sometimes against the wind, concentrating around certain areas before dissipating. That night was the worst yet. The sound of falling stones continued, closer and more frequent. At around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps circling my tent. Slow, deliberate steps that paused occasionally before continuing. I called out, thinking another hiker might be lost in the area, but received no response. The steps continued for nearly an hour before fading away. I didn't sleep after that. Morning brought no relief from the fog, but I packed up quickly, determined to find my way back to civilization. I deliberately headed in the opposite direction from the cairn, using my backup compass, which was still functioning correctly, to maintain course. After 3 hours of hiking, the fog began to thin slightly. I picked up my pace, hopeful that I was finally leaving whatever strange area I'd found myself in. Then the trail turned around a rocky outcrop, and there it was again, the cairn. Only now, it wasn't a cairn at all, not really. The stones had rearranged themselves into something more like a door frame, with the hollow center now clearly a passage leading somewhere. The rocks themselves were definitely blue-tinged now, with strange angular patterns I couldn't recall seeing in any highland geology. I approached slowly, camera in hand. Through the viewfinder, I could see that the passage appeared to extend much further than the physical size of the cairn should allow. It was impossible, of course, some trick of light and shadow, but when I lowered the camera and looked directly, the passage seemed normal again, just a shallow hollow in a pile of rocks. I raised the camera again. Through the lens, the passage extended into darkness. I was backing away when I noticed something that froze me in place. In the dirt around the cairn were footprints, my own boot prints from previous visits, judging by the tread pattern. But there were other prints too, overlapping mine. They resembled human footprints, but were wrong somehow. Too long, with an unusual gait and what looked like only 4 toes. That's when I ran. I didn't care which direction anymore. I just needed to get away from that thing. I ran until my lungs burned, until sweat soaked through my layers despite the cool mountain air. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, I found myself in a landscape I didn't recognize at all. The fog had lifted somewhat, revealing mountains that were definitely not part of the Scottish Highlands. They were too jagged, too vertical, with strange formations, jutting out at impossible angles. The vegetation was wrong too. What had been heather and gorse was now something else. Plants with geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly. My watch said I'd been running for 20 minutes. But the sun's position suggested hours had passed. When I checked my GPS, the screen displayed an error message I'd never seen before. My phone was dead, despite having been at 70% charge that morning. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I walked for what seemed like days, though my watch only recorded 8 hours. The landscape grew increasingly alien. Rocks that seemed to move when not observed directly. Plants that recoiled from touch. colors in the sky that I don't have names for. And always, no matter which direction I traveled, I would eventually find the cairn. Sometimes it appeared as a doorframe, sometimes as a complete circle of stones, sometimes as a spiral pattern on the ground. But always hollow, always with that passage visible only through my camera lens. On what my watch claimed was the fourth day, I woke to find myself lying beside a small stream. The landscape around me was normal again, typical highland terrain. My GPS was functioning, showing me about 2 miles from where I'd parked my car. My phone had power again and even showed a weak signal. I made it back to my car that afternoon. The date on my phone showed I'd been gone for exactly the planned 7 days, though my journal entries and watch suggested only 4 had passed. The photos on my camera were corrupted, all except the first one of the original cairn. In that image, if you look closely at the pile of stones, you can just make out what appears to be a hand reaching out from within. I've been back to the highlands twice since then, with other climbers attempting to find that specific trail again. We never could. Landmarks I'd noted don't exist, valleys are in the wrong places, streams flow in different directions than I remembered. Sometimes at night, I wake to the sound of stones falling nearby. My compass no longer points north. It points to wherever that cairn might be, and occasionally, when I take random photos with my camera, I catch glimpses in the background of blue-tinged stones arranged in patterns no human would build. I don't think I fully escaped. I think parts of that other world came back with me, replacing bits of my reality piece by piece. And sometimes I wonder if I'm still there, wandering those alien mountains while something else is here, wearing my face, living my life. If you're hiking in the highlands and come across a hollow cairn, don't approach it, don't photograph it, and whatever you do, don't look too long at what might be inside. Most people think the greatest threat in the wilderness is getting lost. Tonight, we've learned differently. The real danger isn't losing your way, it's finding something else's. Those silent spaces between trees, those unmarked canyons, those ancient stones stacked just so. They're not empty, they're waiting for someone to whistle back, to speak into the echo, to rearrange what shouldn't be rearranged. The wilderness doesn't care about your itinerary or your return ticket. It operates on a different calendar altogether. So the next time you're packing for that scenic hike, remember to bring your water, your first aid kit, your emergency beacon. But understand that some things can't be prepared for. And while your car might still be sitting there in the trailhead parking lot, patiently collecting dust until your return, some paths don't lead back to where you started. Because the most terrifying thing about being lost in the wilderness isn't the isolation or the elements. It's discovering you were never really alone out there to begin with.